Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to assemble this plastic 28mm or 1/56 scale M10/M36 tank destroyer by Rubicon Models. As you might be able to read on the box, this kit can be used to make 7 different variants of the model, these being the M10, M10A1, Achilles 1C, Achilles 2C, M36, M36B1 and M36B2. To be fair, this kit can really only make 6 variants by itself. You do need the hull from the M4A3 Sherman kit if you want to build the M36B1. The back of the box has a couple of paragraphs about the M10 and its variants and their roles in the war. I do quite like this information being included on the boxes. There's also a basic painting guide for an M10 Wolverine using Vallejo colours, and an image of the included water slide decal sheet. After a little bit of consideration, I have decided that I'm going to build the Achilles 2C, mostly because I like the way the gun looks on that version and the extra armour plate on the front of the hull is interesting. It was a hard decision to come to, and I will probably have to get another one of these kits at some point. Let's have a look inside the box. First, there's this set of instructions. Because there are so many variants you can make with this kit, the instructions do suggest paying attention to them, and I agree. This is always good advice. The instruction booklet, as Rubicons always are, is well laid out, clear and easily understood. These instructions have different diagrams for different variants of this model, unlike the combined diagrams in the Italeri Panzer III kit I built the other week. This kit can be used to make a similar number of variants, yet the instructions have been arranged in different ways. Either way, these are good, as are these decals. There's quite a few options for markings on this sheet, not only US markings, but markings for other allied nations too. Very nice. The 3 sprues come individually wrapped in their own bags, which I like. Sprue A only has a few parts on it, but they're kind of important. Things like the upper hull, lower hull, tracks, and the M36 turret. These parts are really neatly moulded and crisp looking. Things like the hull aren't intricately detailed, but that reflects the real vehicle. The details that are there are quite nice, and there's not really a whole lot in the way of mould lines. The most prominent mould lines on this kit are those on the tracks. Fortunately, the upper run of the tracks will be covered by hull, so we don't need to remove the mould lines from that area, only the front and rear of the tracks. Moving on to Sprue B, and we can see this one has a lot of guns, 2 engine decks, and 2 different but very similar turrets, along with a couple of other bits and pieces. Something I quite like that Rubicon does with their machine guns is mould them on sprues like this. It's harder to accidentally break the barrel when removing it from the sprue when the sprue gate is on the side of the barrel rather than at the end. The differences in the 2 engine decks might not look like much at a quick glance, but they're really quite different, and I'm glad we get a choice of which one to use. These parts are just as well made as the previous sprue. Sprue C is where we find things like the bogies, gun mantlets, and turret counterweights. You can see how one out of each set of 3 bogies has differently flattened wheels. More about that later. The tools moulded onto the whole rear here look nice and sharp. There's also other various little detail-y bits that I don't really have a lot to say about, except that they look neat and well detailed. Thumbs up from me. Let's change these from parts into a tank destroyer, starting with, as the instructions suggest, the tracks. These look to be pretty similar, if not the same, as the track sets on the Rubicon Sherman. The inner bogies are separate pieces. Do pay attention to which part you need for these. For each side there are 2 bogies with flattened wheel bottoms and one that looks a bit different. The different one with 2 angles goes towards the rear like so. Nothing particularly tricky about this. The inner bogie parts form a kind of shelf, I guess, for lack of better words, that the hull will kind of sit on. Next comes the drive sprocket. This part is keyed to ensure correct positioning, and the detailed side goes towards the hull, though it won't be visible once this assembly is glued to the hull, which is what I did next. You can see that the lower hull parts have a kind of pocket that matches with the shelfy part on the bogies. This combined with the axle parts for the drive sprocket and idler wheels makes it next to impossible to put the tracks on the wrong side. I then glue the 2 halves of the lower hull together. Don't get too hasty with this. You need to put the tow hook part in between the lower hull parts before gluing them together. Once that's in place, join the 2 hull parts. This is pretty simple, though you might find you need to apply some pressure to minimize the gaps, though most, if not all of the joins on these 2 hull parts won't be visible once the model is completed anyway. I then add the curved plate thing into the slot in the rear of the lower hull. My assumption is that this thing blows air and exhaust away from the vehicle to reduce dust. Not 100% sure though. It's very easily glued into place. Now I turn my attention to the upper hull. There are some internal details to add to this, so don't glue it to the lower hull before you add those. I add some external details first, starting with the hatches for the driver and, well, I guess the co-driver, because there's no hull machine gun. These can be modelled open, though I am clearly gluing mine shut. The shape of these hatch parts is asymmetrical enough that they should be very hard to put on the wrong side. Moving to the side of the hull, I glue on this rack. Insert nice rack comment here. I believe these held grousers for the tracks. There's a recess on each side of the hull into which these can easily be glued. Next, the hull rear can be installed. I did trim down the inner edges of the hull rear to try and make this part fit better and minimize the gap here. I don't think there should be a gap here at all, so I'll fill this with putty. See Herbert Erpaderp's quick tips from a couple of weeks ago if you want to see a quick demonstration of that. There's a link in the description, or you can click the video on screen now. I then installed the interior detail I spoke of before. There's not really a lot to it. It's just a couple of simple ammo racks. There's a raised border to guide their placement, so they're easily glued into place. I suspect the inside of the hull won't be especially visible through the turret under the gun breech and such, but it is nice to have a little bit of detail in there. If you're building the M36 hull, you'll need to install a different ring part here too, because that turret has a smaller turret ring. Next, the instructions say to build the turret, but I'm going to complete the hull first because I'm a badass rebel. I glue the upper and lower hull pieces together. This is pretty easily done. There are only really two contact points to apply glue to here, the raised part towards the rear of the hull and its corresponding receptacle on the inside of the hull top, and these 2 points at the front of the hull. I applied pressure for a little while the parts bonded. Then I glue the final drive part to the front of the hull. This is yet another part that goes into place nice and easily. Just make sure to use the correct part. They're very slightly different. This went together really neatly. I then add the engine deck. This is ridiculously easy to attach. Short of trying to glue this on upside down, I don't see how this could possibly go wrong. Assuming you selected the correct engine deck part, that is. I finished the hull by gluing on this extra armoured plate to the front of the hull. This part is only used for the Achilles 2C, though apparently not all of them had it. There are recesses on the back of this part that match up with the bumps on the front of the hull. It fits amazingly well. And that's it. Hull completed. It is now turret time. For the Achilles, we need to remove one of the seats from this ring part. I guess there must have been a crew position deleted from this variant or something like that. Clip the seat off and then clean up the part. Make sure you don't trim off any of the raised parts on the bottom of the ring, because they'll help you position this part properly. I then glue together the turret halves. To make things easier, I install the seat holding ring part and the gun breech before I put the two halves of the turret together. Be sure you install both of these parts the right way up. There is a guide pin in the rear of the turret and a sort of tab in the front. Both of these make getting both halves of the turret aligned nicely very easy. After I put this together, I realised I probably should have glued the ammo into the back of the turret first. It was a bit more fiddly, but I did manage to get it glued into place anyway. The ammo should be facing in towards the centre of the tank like so. Not too hard, but it really should have been done while the turret was still in two pieces. There's also this stowage box for something. I don't know. It goes into place here. There's a little recess to guide its placement. After this, I glue on the little partial roofy part at the front of the turret. This does look quite messy here at the front of the turret, but I didn't feel it was worth cleaning up because it will be hidden by the mantlet. I glue this into place next. It goes on really easily, which is not at all surprising. The gun comes next. This part was quite neat and barely needed any mold line removal. The only problem I had with it, minor as it was, is that the end of the barrel was solid. I carefully drill it out and the gun's appearance is improved. The gun is actually keyed, but you can still put it in wrong. The keying just keeps the part from rotating. The muzzle brake should sit with the two holes facing out towards the sides and not up and down. Very easily installed. I finished this turret by gluing on the counterweights. Be sure to select the correct counterweights for the version you are building. The Achilles 2C has the bigger, duckbill counterweights, and no pintle-mounted machine gun, for some reason or other. The Achilles 1C does have the machine gun and also has the smaller counterweights. There are recesses on the back of the turret, so these parts are easy to position, and there we have it. One plastic Rubicon M10 Achilles 2C in 28mm scale, completed and ready to give the Germans a good kicking. I, however, am not finished. I'm also going to be making the M36 turret. It won't really work with the hull I built, though you can sort of just sit it in place and use it that way if you really want to. But I'm going to use the M36 turret on the Sherman hull to make the M36B1. I figured I would be smart and glue this part in before assembling the two turret halves. It's some kind of vision device. I'm assuming it's the gunner's sight. There's a couple of raised lugs onto which this part will sit easily. The two halves of the turret can then be glued together, just like the other turret with the main gun sandwiched between the two parts. There are guide pins at the front and rear, so this is very easy to do nice and neatly, though you may need to apply pressure to eliminate any gaps as the glue sets. Position the gun at the elevation you desire, and then it's time to put the forward turret roofy part on. This went into place easily enough, though I did manage to knock the gunner's sight part off because I didn't wait for the glue to dry, and thus caused myself to have to fiddle with the part to get it into place anyway. Not that it was super hard or anything, but it's probably a good idea to be careful with this. Next comes the ammo rack. This is represented by a flat part that is glued into the back of the turret here. There's a convenient raised line here to stop you from sliding this part in too far. It's not a very convincing ammo rack though without a roof. So that's what comes next. This has keying to help position it correctly, so you just have to place it right here over the rear of the turret. Easy. Then a gun mantlet is required. I add some glue and then slide the mantlet over the gun. This is keyed so that you can't put it on upside down, and this step is why the gun doesn't have a muzzle brake yet. I added that next. You can see there is some fairly obvious keying on the end of the gun barrel, and of course on the muzzle brake itself. I've drilled out the end of mine. It looks a little bit messy, but it's still better than having a smooth, solid end. The parts go together very easily. I did have to hold the parts together while the glue bonded though. The result does have a tiny bit of a gap on the underside of the barrel, but it's pretty hard to notice. The final detail this turret needs is the pintle-mounted machine gun. There are two of these guns in the kit, but only one has the pintle mount. It simply glues into place in the hole in the top of the rear roof. You can have this pointing any way you like, but I've mounted mine facing rearwards because I don't want my invisible crew to bump their heads on it. Glue on the ammo box for the MG, and that's one M36 turret completed. And thus ends my construction of the Rubicon 28mm scale M10 or M36 or other variant kit. I really like this kit. It was quick and very easy to build. The instructions were easily understood and followed, and I had no issues in getting this model built. It's quite nicely detailed, and all of the parts were well molded and there were only minimal mold lines. I'm not an expert on tanks or tank destroyers, but it looks to be a fairly accurate representation of an M10, or in my case an Achilles 2C. The only details I felt were really lacking is the treads on the tracks. This isn't uncommon with Rubicon kits, and I expect this is the trade-off for single part tracks. I don't have a problem with this, though some might. The good thing is the tread part of the tracks is mostly not visible. The side of the tracks and road wheel parts look pretty good, kind of the reverse of the Italeri plastics I have looked at lately where the road wheels are lacking and the treads look great. Unfortunately, I don't have any M10s in this scale with which I could compare this model, though I think it would fare well against anything by Warlord or Italeri. Obviously, with this being the Achilles, I'm going to be painting this model for my British bolt-action army. I did have a little bit of trouble deciding on which variant and which nation's vehicle to build from this kit. I'm more interested in the British forces, so that influenced my choice. I am going to build an actual US force now though, using the models included in the new bolt-action Band of Brothers box set, so the M36 turret might get some use there. As you can see, I put the M36 turret onto the Sherman hull to make the M36B1. Seems this wasn't a common vehicle, but it's a good way to get a free second tank destroyer. That is, if you're not using the Sherman as a Sherman. You can of course just sit the M36 turret on the M10 hull. The only problem you should have with that is the turret won't lock onto the hull. Not a huge issue during gameplay. The detailing inside the M36 turret is a little bit lacking. Other than the ammo rack and gun breech, there's not really much in there. Otherwise, it looks quite good. So what do you think? Have you built an M10 of any variety by Rubicon or maybe some other manufacturer? I would like to see your thoughts in the comments section below, along with any other comments, questions or suggestions. If you liked this video, click the thumbs up button. If you thought it was a bit poo, thumbs down. If you like the videos I make, feel free to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and share my videos with anyone you think might find them helpful. If you really like what I do, please consider helping to support the channel via Patreon, at patreon.com/Herbert Erpaderp. My patrons have already seen this video because they get to see them a little earlier than everybody else. If that interests you, you can click the Patreon logo on screen now or the link in the description. I will be back again soon, so until then, happy modelling and thanks for watching. Farewell.